Hey everyone, welcome to the AI Branding Podcast, where we talk everything AI, branding, marketing, and content, trying to find the intersection of all four and ending up with the tools that are going to help you scale your business faster and easier than ever before. Today, I have a friend of mine, Corey Hiben. He's actually working in the healthcare space and has developed his niche over a few years, or actually not even a few years. How fast did you do that, Corey?
I started working in healthcare like 10 years ago, but I've only started doing the agency maybe 5 years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, 5 years, that's still pretty significant. So you went all the way through the craziness of the last half decade and came to healthcare. It's funny because we've talked about this a few times, but I ended my agency in healthcare as well, for a few different reasons, which we'll discuss on this show. So why don't we just start by talking about, how you got into branding specifically with your business?
Yeah, I mean, even before that, like kind of how I ended up where I'm at now is through most things in life is pain.
Yep.
I feel like people often reach that point where it's rather the pain of staying the same or the fear of the unknown. And ultimately, for me, it was the fear of the unknown. And I was working in healthcare at the time, and this was even like mid-pandemic when I was working in healthcare. And I used to practice as an occupational therapist. I don't practice anymore, but yeah, just like from being on the inside of the industry of like being front lines, patient care, I realized like it's a painful place to be, honestly, for a lot of practitioners. Is you feel overworked and underpaid and underappreciated, and despite like realizing like I really wanted to help people, and despite realizing like I didn't want to start my own practice, that's kind of how I found myself in between that point of do I continue to work in the healthcare or do I find a way to help other healthcare professionals solve challenges that I dealt with as a professional? Because even when I was working in that role, I was responsible for getting my own patients. And so I was responsible for understanding marketing and funnels and networking and all the things. And I made a lot of mistakes and did a lot of dumb things and honestly struggled a lot with the marketing side of things before I started my own agency. But branding honestly didn't come until much later. I didn't even understand the importance of branding, and I think a lot of people probably fall into that camp. Brand is a word is honestly kind of confusing, and it has a lot of just like confusing jargon and stigma, I think, built around it. When somebody hears a brand, they're like, "Oh, no, no, no! Like I don't know what that is. That sounds confusing and complex, and I have no idea what to do." And it wasn't honestly pretty far into my journey of marketing and having my design agency that I realized like it's the crux of everything. like like at the end of the day is like if I had to pick one metric in terms of everything that I can control in terms of if I wanted to grow a sustainable business, it would be brand. When you look at every major company from Apple to Tesla to Elon to Jobs to Amazon, is on the back of every single one of them is their ability to create a really strong brand that people know, like, and trust, and they're willing to work with them and buy anything that they so desire because they trust them. And so, like, if you are struggling with marketing, anyone's listening to the show is like, if you're struggling with the marketing side of things, I would highly encourage you to dive into just understanding the basics of branding. And it's not honestly as crazy or complex as I think that we like to assume that it is. And we can get into it if you want to in terms of like what that might look like. But yeah, it didn't come till much later in my web design journey. And now looking back at it, it's something I wish I would have done sooner for sure.
It's so funny because I was actually the exact same way because I went a little different path because instead of marketing, I was into content where it's kind of like, okay, you just need to produce lots of good content. But what I found with my stuff was it's like no content matters if it isn't branded, right? Because it's like, who cares if you got a viral post or had like a popular thing that you made if there's nothing behind it, like there's no more of it because it was just built randomly. So, but just for the audience, how do you define brand? Like, how do you explain branding to your clients, let's say?
Yeah, if I had to wrap it into a word, I would say it's an association.
Mm.
So if you make a logo, if you create content, if you host an event, if you put a product out into the world, everything you create, everything you design, every interaction that you have creates an association between you and that customer and that brand. Like that is all you're trying to do. And that's why a big part of branding, just to make this more simple for people, is like imagine you have like a bouquet of flowers and you have like all sorts of different colors and different types. And really, what you're trying to do as a brand is you really want to be just known for one. Like, let's
Mm.
just say you just want to be known for the rose. So, a big part of branding is pruning. It's getting rid of all the extra things that shouldn't be in the bouquet, just so people have a very clear association and a very clear idea of what it is you do. And so like every interaction, which is something obviously you teach a lot of people about, is like you want the touch points of all these interactions to be the exact same for the most part for every interaction, every touch point that you have for somebody, because you want that association to be like, oh, I see this thing, I associate this immediately with this business or this brand. Like it's my favorite example of this is like when they show like blurry images of like a McDonald's logo or a Tesla logo, and you immediately know what it is. And the reason you know what it is because of how much association they've built up behind that brand through whether it's their marketing or through it's their products or their services or their interactions or their engagements with it. It's just a constant association of you know exactly what you're going to feel, you know exactly how the associate or the reputation that they represent, the values that they stand for. But that's how I try to explain it to people is like just understanding it's an association. It's just like how do you know a friend or a family member? Well, it's like they have certain mannerisms,
Mm.
and when you engage with them, they maybe have the same jokes, or maybe they wear the same outfits. It's like that's your association with them. A brand is the exact same thing.
Ah, I love that. Well, I love the word association because I think we call it impression, where it's like, okay, is the impression lasting and can you associate? Well, it still comes back to association. So I love that term. And I love how you kind of ended the definition with people. Because really, if you just think of like, okay, well, if your brand was a person, would that person be definable? Or, like we're talking about friends and family, when you show up every time, are their moods different? Are they, wearing a completely different style of outfit? Are they talking differently? Like that would, if you knew a person like that, that would trip you out. That'd be like, well,
You would
actually,
think they're crazy.
you would. You think they're great, but that would be their brand. If they were consistently inconsistent, that would still be good branding because you'd be like, oh, that's Joe. Who knows what he's going to be today? And then everybody would know Joe by randomness. So that's maybe not a great example, but just imagine that you're trying to get to know somebody, and every single time you see them, they're totally different. You probably won't
No,
remember. Well,
No,
that.
I think that's a great example. Like just to play off of that, you see this with certain personal brands as well. Like I have a buddy of mine here in Austin. He's a endurance athlete and endurance runner, and every single time I see one of his posts or anything that he creates, I pretty much like subconsciously assume there's going to be some sarcastic humor to it.
Hmm.
Like the second the video starts and it's like something serious and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe he's running 100 miles." I know somewhere in that clip there's going to be a sarcastic humor joke because that's his brand. That's what he
Hmm.
does. That's what he represents. And that's the exact same thing with your business. Is like obviously it's very easy to see that with a personal brand because it's an actual human, but the same thing applies to your business as well. Another example of this is, are you familiar with the Savannah bananas? Are
Oh
you familiar
yeah.
with this?
Oh man, they're huge now.
Okay, just look at that from a branding standpoint, right? It's honestly brilliant in terms of the colors, the visuals, the mood, the style, the feel, like how you interact. Is every time you see something by the Savannah Bananas, if anybody knows doesn't know what that is, it's a minor league baseball team in Savannah, Georgia, and they have basically brought entertainment to baseball, essentially, I guess you could say. And they've done a phenomenal job with like choreography and making it super fun and engaging and family friendly. But every interaction with this is like, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get like goofy, sarcastic, fun, playful showmanship. And they continue to do it again and again. And that builds an association around what they do. So people know it. They know, like, and trust it.
Oh, I love that. Well, that's actually a great brand to review too. I'm like, oh, I gotta add that to the list because the crazy part about them is they actually know how to play baseball too. Like they're kind of like Harlem Globetrotter, esque, where it's like, oh, they're being goofy, but those are actual competitions and they're actually good baseball players. But then they're also adding the entertainment value, and the ladies like it is what a lot of people get out of that. But no, excellent branding. And the funny thing that I find about branding, and probably the argument you've had with clients too, where they think that having that same message over and over again is a bad thing. Like, oh, people are going to get bored with my brand because I keep on saying the same thing. What do you tell people when they talk about that?
If people knew how hard I work to get a single message across to people, they would be baffled. It's it's like
So much
it
work.
like you're let's just look at your own like family relationships for a second here. How many times do you have to tell your wife or husband or partner or child the same thing before they actually do the thing or actually understand the thing you're trying to tell them? Now let's zoom out and say, okay, now you're trying to put that message in front of hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, and you think somehow they're gonna pay attention to what you have to say, especially on the first encounter. It's almost laughable, right? It's like,
I wish.
it's oh my gosh, I wish it's I couldn't have said it better myself, Mark. Like, I wish I could create a single piece of content and people immediately knew everything I stand for and what I believe in and what my values are and what my services are. It's laughable to think that that's actually going to happen. Like I create so much content, Mark, and I know you do too, from podcasting to social media platforms to a newsletter to I do networking events, and people still to this day go, by the way, what do you do? What services do you offer? And I don't get offended anymore. It's just, and the only reason I say that is just to like give people some framework in terms of like how hard it is to get people to understand what it is that you do and what you stand for and the offer that you have to provide people. So like if you're not repeating it again and again and again, you're definitely missing out. On top of that too is like all the big content creators that I follow and associate and mentors that I have is they will tell you time and time again is like very often they just repurpose content. They just reuse content. They'll go back 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. They'll take content they already created and they'll redo it, and they'll do just as well because nobody was paying attention the first time, and they're probably not going to pay attention the second time, and it's unlikely that they'll pay attention the third time. So they just keep reposting it. So it's so true.
No, that's a great way to describe it because it is, and it's that 100,000 strangers. I think the way entrepreneurs look at it is like, okay, I gotta get this perfect because somebody's gonna sit down and they're gonna critique everything on my website and they're gonna critique this, they're gonna do that. It's like, no, you're the only one doing that. At best, maybe your competitors are looking at you like that, but your customers, like they don't give a crap. You could do so many things. And if you do the different thing every single time, like you've made one impression and there's one impression and there's one impression. And, they say like what, 7 impressions. I've heard up to, Qasim Muslim, he talks about 500 impressions. And I'm like, I think that's more like it. 500 impressions. And you're just beating people over the head with the same thing over and over and over again. But I think the reason why entrepreneurs specifically don't want to do it is because most of the time they're very creative people and they're bored with it. They're like, oh, I'm so sick of saying this same thing over and over again. How do you get them to, still do that?
Yeah, just to play off of what you were just talking about too, I think a good example just to drive this point home is you're obviously familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk. And if you look at Gary Vaynerchuk's content, anybody who doesn't know who he is, he's just a big media guy, big marketer, content creator type guy. And he tells pretty much the same three stories again and again and again. And like one of them is like his dad owned a liquor store and he blew up the marketing via social media is like one of his stories. And he just has three stories that he tells again and again and again. And he creates more content than anybody I know. And still to this day, he's been doing it for I think like 15 years. Still to this day, people like it, they comment on it, they say things like, "Oh my gosh, that's crazy. That story is so out of this world." And it's like he's been saying the same stories for 15 years. And yet we as business owners think that a single post is somehow going to resonate with all of our entire audience that's following us on the very first post. Get out of here.
Yes. Yeah. Well, again, it's like I wish that happened. I wish people would be like, "Oh yeah, no, I totally get it. Could you stop saying that, please? I'm so bored with your message." But no, that doesn't happen ever.
We have an amazing limited time offer that you won't want to miss. Introducing the Build Your Brand Pillars course from AI Branding Academy, your gateway to mastering both traditional branding and AI-powered marketing strategies. With this course, you'll gain invaluable skills in creating strong brand foundations that stand out in today's competitive market. Perfect for innovation leaders like you. Don't wait. Take advantage of this special offer before it's gone. Head to aibranding.academy.
But getting around for me personally, like to get around that, like, okay, I'm always doing different. The only way I get around is by planning, where I'm like, okay, well, like right now we're doing like the 28-day challenge. And I'm like, all right, I know I only have 28 days. I know I have to cover these, 10 topics. And so I can only do the message this way. And that seems to help a little bit. But
Yeah,
yeah, your
I would say too.
repurposing idea is awesome.
Yeah, and I would say too is just to use an analogy and an association for people is like it's kind of like working out, right? Like so generally speaking, you're doing the same muscle groups every single effing time. You're gonna do some chest workouts, you're gonna do some back workouts, and you're gonna do some leg workouts. But how you do those, there's a billion ways you could do it. So I think content is the same way. Is that generally speaking, you're saying the same things over and over again. You're just reformatting how you're saying it. So one time it could be text, one time it could be video, one time it could be on a conversation with a podcast, and you could maybe add a different photo, and maybe you could restructure some of the wording, or maybe you could restructure the order or a different hook. Or so at the end of the day is like, yeah, you are kind of saying the same thing over and over again in the same way that I go to the gym and do the same muscle groups every single time. I'm just changing the way that so it allows me some creativity. So I'm just changing basically how I say the same things over and over again. That's how I kind of approach it.
Yeah, love that. Now, let's talk about your specific industry of healthcare, because that's not necessarily the most sexy, thing you could do. I mean, for a lot of people, it's like, hey, you help people feel better. But how do you kind of boil down that core message that we're talking about repeating so often for the healthcare businesses you work with?
Yeah, the healthcare industry is like fun and horrible at the exact same time. It's horrible in the sense that like if you look at any sort of healthcare, I mean, you know this, you work in the industry. It's like if you look at most healthcare businesses or companies, they are as dry and as corporate-y as humanly possible, and they have a real challenge with having any sort of authenticity or any sort of realness to them of like actual engagements with customers or patients or showing like real stories or real transformations is they struggle with that a lot, as you totally know. I will say the thing that I love about it though is like for the same reason that I got into healthcare is like I wanted to help people. And I feel like for me, health is my number one value, and it's so important to me. And I like there's a quote, I'm going to butcher it, so I apologize. But essentially it's like, when you have your health, you have a million problems. When you don't have your health, you have one problem.
I love it.
And I think it's so true is like whenever we're sick or we're injured or we're dealing with something, it consumes our life and it absorbs us. And it's very hard to be a hardworking, kind, friendly, good human when we just don't feel good, whether that's sickness or injury. And so that's what I love about the industry is that I feel like I'm helping people live healthier lives. And in terms of like helping other people in that space. So if I was talking to one of my clients or a healthcare professional or anybody in that space that really needs help with the marketing branding side of things, if I had to whittle it down to probably just a couple things that I would tell them is number one is kind of what I was saying too, is like I think that authenticity, as trite as that statement is becoming more important than ever before, especially with AI. Even stuff that we're doing is that I can't tell you the number of times where I've like seen a piece of content or a post or a website, and in my gut, I'm like, is this even real? Did AI generate this? Is this fake? Like, what's going on here? And that's not a good feeling. And so, like, if you can really lead into transparency and honesty and authenticity with your content or your brand or your business, that's going to resonate with a lot of people. So that's the first thing I would tell them. And the other thing I would tell them too is like, there's this idea of what's called the messy middle. And I believe this to be more true now in 2025 than ever before, is that and you, again, I keep referring back to you because I know you just know so much about this industry, is like you would know better than anyone that the funnel, quote unquote, used to be a little simpler. It used to kind of be like there was rather an ad or a post of some form or a media outlet that have led to maybe we'll say a drip campaign or some emails that ultimately led to like a purchase or a customer. Now it's just not that simple. Now there's just so many touch points, from socials to networking events to podcasts to YouTubes to advertisements to email to everything in between. And so I call it the messy middle. Is like there's just so many steps now that happen between somebody finding out about your brand to ultimately becoming a customer and purchasing from you. And so that middle stage is one, very confusing as hell, and two, is like more important than ever before to have what we're talking about in terms of like a strong brand and a brand that has good association across all touch points, because it's very likely that someone's going to be like, they might see an ad and then they watch one of your YouTube videos and then maybe they get an email and then they run into the owner at a networking event and then 3 weeks down the road they decide to work with you. That's kind of how the messy middle works now. And that's why branding is more important than ever before, is because it creates that strong association across all touch points that every time they interact with you, now they're like building trust, building trust, building trust, and you're warming them up before they eventually hopefully work with you.
I love that. Well, and I think it's, the authenticity side, I completely agree with, because with the AI, it's funny because people kind of launch into marketing with AI with like, hey, let's replace you with a robot version of you. And let's replace a customer care rep with a chat version. And I'm just like, man, those are the human touch points. Like those are the best touch points. And you're automating that first. Why not go with something that you don't care about, like internal operations or a million or production? I always say, because I focus on content a lot. I'm like, I don't want to replace people coming up with ideas. I want to replace the process that they had to go to get those ideas from initial ideation to actually releasing it. Like that's the part you want to automate, not the initial ideas. And I think it's hard to explain to people because they're like, but we've been doing this for years, because, using AI and outsourcing your content production are the same things to me. Like you didn't come up with either one of those things unless you do it right. But it's nothing new, it's still not you. So, and the authenticity side is also your protection against deep fakes and people ripping off your brand and doing all these different things, because your audience will know you versus a rip off of you. And then that's really the only protection I've seen. But have you found some ways to kind of encourage the authenticity in the practice?
Yeah, and I would say too is I think I don't like to speak in hyperboles, but there's this unfortunate, we try to scale something before we create something valuable. And I just literally had a call, not to say any names or anything, but I literally just had a call with a client of mine recently, and we finished a website for him, and we were trying to set up basically so he could get a text message whenever somebody received or got a contact form submission, so that he could immediately start texting them, right? Just to get that quick touch point like we were just talking about before. And immediately he's like, can we just like kind of like automate this? Can we use exactly what you said, like a chat bot, or can we have some sort of like auto thing happening? And I was like, we could, but your conversions are for sure going to go down. Like, I'm just going to be honest with you. Like, could we do it? Yeah, definitely. But, and so there's this idea that we try to like scale and simplifies and like remove the human component from it to essentially save us time. I understand why somebody would do it, but if the biggest driver to growing your business is getting customers, you should probably hold on to that as long as possible. Don't get me wrong. There's always
the only
tipping
thing
points.
you should hold on to.
Yeah. Right. And there's always tipping points, right? Is like when you reach the point, if you do reach the point where you have more supply than demand, then let's talk about it. Then let's talk about the automation piece of it and the scaling piece of it. But like, stop trying to scale something that isn't even scalable yet, right? Like, that I think we way too often do that, especially in the service industry. I see that a lot. Is like we're trying to like create this scalable SaaS type automated business, and it's like, yo, let's stay real for a while. Let's create real value. Let's have real connections, and then when we reach the point, like, stop trying to fix problems that aren't there.
Yes. No,
At the end of the day.
Well, and you see it in marketing too, where it's kind of, and I'm not going to name names either, but sometimes you'll see people where it's like huge success, and then they just kind of disappear for a while, and then huge success, and then they disappear for a while, and that's exactly what you're finding, where it's like they've made a solution that's like just skin deep, and there's nothing underneath it, and so yeah, they'll make sales, but as soon as they saturate the market with whatever the solution is they're providing, there's nothing behind it. Like there's nothing next. And then they just go to the next product and then the next product. And, unfortunately with a business like healthcare, you can't do that. There's only so many people in your geographic area you could actually serve. And if you're just trying to just get them in the door, let's get the initial whatever, and then who cares, then you're going to be cooked after, not very long most of the time. But I will say
Totally.
the reason it happens is because you as marketers, we're trying to be like results oriented. So it's like, hey, let's just get you results. I'm going to get you 500 calls coming in, and I'm going to get you 500 consulting appointments, and I'm going to get you all this stuff with no look at the back end of like, well, what happens next? Well, it's like, I don't care, that's not my job. But it really is. So do you actually talk to your clients about like, say the onboarding process and a little bit more of that kind of operational side?
Yeah, I would say over the years, since doing this for 5+ years now, is that I've gotten just a lot better at saying no. At
Oh,
the end of the day, is like I have found that if I don't believe in the business or I don't think they have a good product or service, it's unlikely of what I'm going to do is even going to help at the end of the day. Is especially like I have found too is like after doing this for long enough is I used to take a lot more like early stage business owners and people just like brand new starting out, and I quickly realized is like they're actually not ready for a lot of the things that we're providing. Like they probably don't actually need much branding or a website or a funnel or email like none of that actually really matters. Like if you're just starting a business, you're probably just tapping into your local network, trying to figure out how to provide a good product or service to those people. And you're still iterating on the process of like operations and service and onboarding and offboarding. And so any of the marketing stuff at the end of the day is mostly a waste of time. And honestly, you just don't have time for it realistically, and you're probably going to change it somewhere down the road. So it's like I have found that saying no is just like way more common for me. Is like if I don't see that a business is actually going to benefit from any of the marketing services that I'm going to provide, I just don't do it. Because like even at the end of the day, if we complete it, it's amazing branding, amazing website, all the things, we have the marketing, everything's in alignment, and then they get a whole bunch of customers, and then they can't service them, then they go to like just like nothing about that adds up to a good ending for anybody. So that's the biggest thing on my end anyways.
so how do you them down? Because I think that's, probably the best advice you could give somebody. Like, don't serve people you can't help. But I'm sure hurts them. So how do you let them down easy, or how's it go?
Tell them to go pound sand. No, I don't know. No, I would say
Loser.
that
Don't do that.
no. I can give you a real life example. Like it happened actually recently. There was another. I'm an occupational therapist by trade, like I said before, and so like I get a lot of OTs, PTs, speech therapists. They come to me because like they know I understand the industry, and they need help with their marketing. Awesome. But I had one recently. She was kind of newer in her practice. She was just getting going. She was just leaving her OT career and just like kind of starting out her business. And to let her down easy, as you said, is I was just straight up with her. I was like, hey, we could do all this stuff. It would take this price, this time. I was like, but I'll be honest, like, I just don't think this is a good idea for you right now. And I straight up told her, I was like, because luckily I'm very obsessed with like more than just the marketing side of things. I'm obsessed with like understanding the business. And so it allows me to provide them advice and consulting on like what they should be doing with their business. So for her exactly was I was basically like, hey, right now, like you should probably just focus on getting your initial customers. Probably it's going to be in your local network. So that's going to be probably just like texting people or emailing people or reaching out to people on your social media. And once you feel comfortable and you fully feel like you understand who it is that you serve and how it is that you help them, once you understand those two things, let's circle back. And 9 times out of 10, I'd say 99 times out of 100, they're like, hey, I really appreciate you just like being honest and not trying to hard sell me. And I have no idea if that's going to turn into a client down the road. I don't know what's going to happen. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, is like they're always appreciative of just like my honesty and transparency with it. And it creates a win-win. Is like now I don't have to like get to the end of this project and realize like they just wasted a bunch of money because none of this is going to help them right now anyways because they have no idea who they're talking to. And hopefully I get a referral or maybe they come back to me down the road. So it always creates a win-win.
No, well, and the real big win is that you didn't just, make a client that's going to be not successful, probably going to be a pain in the butt, probably can't really afford you. And now you're spinning your wheels trying to make this, thing that's probably not going to be successful. So I think, yeah, it's all the wins in the world and a very good mature approach. But, I think what you're really discussing is just a principle based decision making process where it's like, hey, I don't help people I can't help. If I find once I assess their business, I'm going to tell them the truth. Like these are all excellent branding components, which is kind of why I made my AI branding academy, because I'm like, really, when you think about it, you could take your branding elements and apply them to every element of your business, and you should apply them to every element of your business. Otherwise, you're, doing that confusion thing that we had where it's like, well, I took Sally because she really needed help, and, I can help her maybe, so I'm going to go ahead and take it on, but I know I shouldn't, and now you've just violated your own principle. So no, that's excellent.
Are you familiar with the niche hourglass? Have you ever heard of this before?
No.
So it's something I more recently discovered from another agency owner, and I thought it was just brilliant. And I think this might be helpful for your audience and probably you as well. And it's exactly what I was just talking about, and I think this is a lot of where this comes from. Is I used to think that you had to define your niche, and it was like pick your perfect audience and your perfect avatar, and then create everything for them, all the branding and all the association and everything around that person specifically. And there's truth to that statement, but I think it's missing the bigger picture. And this is where I learned about the niche hourglass. So essentially what it is that when you're just starting a business, is that you want to stay broad and wide. And so you're still figuring out who that person is and what their challenges are, what their pain points are, and ultimately what you're offering them. So it's like the top of an hourglass. It's very wide. You stay broad. You keep your options open. You're open to opportunities because maybe AI does this new unique thing, and maybe this is a different industry that you just tap into, or whatever it is. You're just keeping your options open. But once you figure out who it is, then it's time. Then it's time for somebody like me or some sort of marketing agency or somebody in that space to come in and like really crystallize who it is that we're talking to and defining who that person is, and then creating the branding specifically for them to help serve them and getting very narrow in that hourglass. And then you get to widen out again. Is like once you can get specific on that person that you're helping, now you can actually broaden maybe the services or the products that you offer, or maybe even like adjacent industries that you can tap into. But it's just this idea of like stay broad in the beginning of a business, then get narrow, create the branding, the focus, target who you want to target, and then get broad again down the road once you're ready to like broaden your services or your industry or adjacent industries or something. So yeah.
That's an excellent concept. And actually my next question was going to be about niching, and you beat me to the punch. So excellent work. Well, this has been a ton of fun, Corey. And I think you're an excellent example of what you just talked about, where it's like, yeah, I went a little broader. I tried to find my market, then I found my market, and now I refine the process, refine my approach, refine my principles. And now I can do a great job serving people and not serving people I can't help. But where can people learn more about you directly, or maybe hire you?
Yeah, all my links are my website, coreyhi.com, coreyhi.com. I have a newsletter, I have a podcast talking specifically to health related business owners, and everything I talk about is related to marketing, branding, positioning, specifically for the health industry. So if that's of any interest, yeah, reach out.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. We'll have you back on the show soon, probably, because this was a great session. I think you covered all the basics of how branding works, and have a really good, definition for explaining it to people. Because even me, and it's my whole business is explaining it to people, I'm still sometimes like, why don't people get it? It's so simple. Like businesses, just treat them like people. How do you like to deal with people? But I think you're really onto something, and it sounds like you're doing a great job for your clients and your non-clients, which I'm sure they appreciate. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, man. I real quick, I just want to echo the statement. We connected in Austin when I first kind of like moved here, and you were open arms to invite me to the events that you guys were opening or hosting. And ever since then, you continue to invite me to other events that you're doing. And now that you're starting this new business, and like I was at the most recent one, and the information was phenomenal. And so I just want to echo the statement and say what you're doing, man, is awesome. I love what you've been doing for the marketing industry, and so I think it's great.
Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate that because you like your story is what I love to hear, where it's like, oh my gosh, somebody took the information and they ran with it and they made awesome new things. Like that's really my goal. So I love hearing that it's working.
Yeah, it is. No question. Your content's phenomenal. So keep going.
I will. I can't stop. That's what I found. All right.
Love
Thank you
it.
so much, Corey.
Cool.
Thank you for listening. This has been the AI Branding Podcast, where we talk everything AI, content, marketing, and branding. For more content like this, please subscribe.